Hi, welcome today, guys. We're kind of starting a series we're calling Crypto Around the World. And today I have with me Hussam. He is one of our core developers here at GoQuai, and he also has family from Algeria. So he's spent quite a bit of time there. So basically, in this series, we're talking to people from different parts of the world, seeing how they use crypto in the region, what they use it for, some of the use cases, the successes, and sort of the pain points. So with that, if you want to give a brief introduction about yourself, get started.
Yeah, so as Dr. K mentioned, my name is Hussam on the GoQuai team. As a core developer, I work mostly on the P2P networking layer, as well as some of the transaction processing, as well as the GPU miner, Stratum proxy, and those supporting projects as well. As Dr. K also mentioned, my heritage is from Algeria, so I have a lot of family that's currently from there. In fact, my parents were born there as well, so in addition to that, I've visited pretty often, and so I feel like I have a decent idea of some of the pain points of not just the current monetary system that exists over there, but also some of the forays into crypto and some of the difficulties people are having with using what currently exists, and hopefully how Quai can solve some of those problems.
Yeah, so just to give context to maybe our American viewers who aren't great at history or geography, Algeria is a country in North Africa. It's on the western part of North Africa. It was previously a French colony, and it was liberated in 62, was it? So since then, it's been an independent state. It's done pretty well, I guess, as far as African economies go. However, what's the current denomination of unit in Algeria?
It's the Algerian dinar.
It's a dinar. So the dinar, I guess, has price control, or not price controls, or rather currency controls on it. So you guys can't freely exchange it for dollars, which gives a slight dollar preference, I guess, in the economy if you want to be able to access imported goods.
Yes.
So maybe start there and just talk about what kind of currency controls exist, and why they exist, and potentially what people need access to things outside of the dinar for.
Yeah, absolutely. So maybe at first it helps to take a step back and look at the Algerian economy and the resources that are available in Algeria and why the government may be incentivized to have these price controls. So the Algerian economy is quite diverse. In fact, some of the history of Algeria since liberating itself from French colonization has been to be as kind of self-sufficient as possible. So historically, Algeria in the modern era didn't really rely as much on imports, and so a lot of the manufacturing was done locally. All of the food growing was done locally. It was able to become more isolated in terms of economics from like the outside world, and so that allowed the currency to develop more independently. And so thankfully, the dinar doesn't see, the crazy inflation levels that like a lot of other economies see. It's nothing like Argentina or anything like that. Although, with any weaker economy that relies on, that has some foreign debts and relies on money printing, there is some inflation. And so as a result, the current state of the currency system is that the exchange rate of the dinar to the dollar is maintained by like the regulated financial institutions such as banks, and that's the only place where you can really like perform legal monetary exchange. But the rate is very very harsh for anyone who wants it. It's very unfair, basically.
Do gray markets exist for the exchange rate?
Absolutely, yeah. So as a result of that, there are plenty of gray markets. Of course, they are actually technically black markets, but we would consider them gray because they're allowed to operate and the government is fully aware of them, and in some cases is able to benefit from the transactions that happen in these gray markets. So normally, as a traveler, if you don't want to use the banking system, what you would do is you would bring in US dollars, and then as soon as you get out of the airport, you go to actually like kind of the central government square where like the government is fully aware of what happens there.
It's going on right outside their window.
Literally, yeah. and in fact, they offer some protection too. Like it's almost like if you get scammed there, like you can almost like go to the government for help because they know that it happens. They get like some kind of rip on it. So they don't crack down on it too hard, but you'd go straight there, convert your dollars to dinars, and then be able to,
So I think the official rate right now is around 160. Is that right?
Something like that.
What would you say the gray market rate would be?
At least double that.
So maybe you'd get so it'd be 320 dinars per dollar rather than 160.
Yeah, something like that. And actually, we can look it up because there are even websites that track the daily spot rate on the gray markets that people refer to that live there. So it's all transparent.
So within Algeria, then, from day to day, you guys aren't suffering from hyperinflation. Relative to the dollar, the dinars maybe lost half its value over a 20-year period, which is nothing too extreme for a foreign currency pair. So you guys transact in it pretty regularly. You're going to the markets. You're using cash. You're using credit. Kind of what is the system that you see inside of Algeria in the economy?
Sure. So for most people, there's rarely a need to get out of the dinar. Except when like either conducting very large transactions sometimes, or like maybe if you're buying a car, some dealers would prefer to be paid in dollars, especially for imported cars like luxury imports. Perhaps if you're buying like basically anything that's of value and imported.
So maybe
more likely
big electronic items,
potentially
cars, things like that.
Maybe if you're buying like a phone off the kind of someone who's just brought it in from outside of the country, then maybe you pay them in dollars. Although generally you have the option, like you can pay in dinars as well. It just depends on what.
Now when they're doing the conversion rate on imported goods, are they using the gray market rate or the official rate?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, no one uses the official rate at all. In fact, anyone like. It's the most obvious tell that you're a tourist if you like come in and try to use the official rate, and they'll even tell you, they'll even be like, "Are you serious?" Like, no, that rate is much worse than what it should be.
Right. So, what do businesses do then if they're like in import export? Do they have access to dollar denominated accounts? Are they just running in cash? Do they have offshore accounts? Like, what's the sort of mechanism that people kind of get access to USD?
How does USD enter the country?
Well, no. So like if I'm a business and I'm a car dealership and I'm importing cars, like what do I do as a car dealership? Am I going to these gray markets and like getting dollars and like stockpiling them and then somehow shipping them over to Europe? Or do I have a euro sort of subsidiary that can hold dollar denominated accounts? Kind of how does that system work?
Okay. So in general, import export is very tightly controlled. In Algeria in terms of like who has access to it and who has any sort of reasonable time importing or exporting. Unless you have a lot of experience in that, you'll get so much trouble from like customs and duty and stuff like that no one like bothers with it. But for those that do, so for example, I would say the biggest exception to that is like textiles or like importing clothes, those kinds of things from like Turkey and like China, stuff like motors, stuff like that. Not really finished goods, but like manufacturing materials. I would say I'm not too familiar with how they do it, but I don't think they're going around stockpiling large amounts of US dollar cash in the country.
Okay.
So yeah, and I know that to answer a previous question about like use of credit and like electronic payment, that's extremely rare.
Everything is cash based, so no one has cards.
Yeah.
What's kind of like the cell phone use like in Algeria?
It's very prevalent.
So smartphone, everyone has like a relatively modern device, QR compatible, web compatible, internet access sort of thing.
Compatible, yes. There's 4G LTEs everywhere.
Okay.
5G is starting to get rolled out. I will say there's still a lot of reliance on like the traditional like cellular networks though, as in like calls over LTE versus like data like WhatsApp and stuff. A lot of people still don't really it's not as much the norm to have large amounts of like data. So people utilize traditional calls. People still use landlines. People still use DSL if that's all they
But everyone
have.
has some access on their phone to
Yeah.
the internet, but they're not streaming YouTube videos.
Yes.
Is maybe the way to think about it.
Yes.
So maybe kind of the US 10 years ago
Perhaps. Yeah.
would be kind of maybe a fair comparison.
Yeah.
Where we like had to worry about our data and
Yeah, it's still very much the case.
yeah, we just got kind of mail and we didn't have the luxury of watching videos as we're riding the bus or
Yeah.
whatnot.
No, that's not really prevalent over there.
Interesting. Okay, so it sounds like you said it's very much a cash-based economy, though. There's no form of credit. There's no Visa. There's no MasterCard. There's no debit cards. So
No merchants accept that.
really, okay.
Yeah.
So if I'm in Algeria as an Algerian, I go to the bank then maybe a couple times a month, and I just get a nice stack of bills and I go spend them, or kind of how does that work?
Yeah, that's one way to do it if you get paid electronically. If you have like a kind of a white collar, some kind of like, company type job. But a lot of people also run their own business. I'd say small business ownership is very prevalent there. So if you're running your own business and you're paying with the cash that your customers give you.
So it's very much like a circular cash economy.
Yeah.
So most people are getting paid in cash by their employers, like in an envelope, like every week or what it might
Yeah.
be.
Yeah, pretty much.
Interesting. How many sort of developed technological like industry is there? It sounds like you said, obviously electronics are getting imported, cars are getting imported. Is there a lot of higher tech? Is there any higher tech sort of industries in Algeria, or is it all sort of agriculture and more basic manufacturing?
So I would say the higher tech that's in Algeria is, unfortunately, a lot of it is subsidiaries of European companies, such as like French companies.
Like Renault, maybe, or
Yeah, sure. But just still strictly talking about like tech based. So like any like startup or like AI company, something like that. A lot of them will be somehow a franchise or subsidiary of like a European company as of right now. There are a few very high profile startups that started in Algeria. One of them is called Yesir, which is kind of an Uber type thing. However, it's like Uber that's optimized for cash based transactions, which is pretty cool. Yeah. It's very popular. It actually works super well.
How does that actually work?
So it's just like Uber, except you pay your driver in cash.
So so it still discovers the fee mechanism, and then I guess so in New York when I get in a taxi, if it's not Uber, I'm kind of the drivers. It's like a restaurant in some ways, right? Like I'm consuming the good before I pay for it. I pay for it before I get out. So I guess that's the similar system that it works. So the app would let me sort of get matched up with the driver. The driver would then like take me to my destination and be like, okay, you owe me 100 dinar or whatever it may be at the end, and I pay and I get out.
Yeah, exactly. And you can add a tip like within whatever coins or bills you have, and that's it.
So I think that makes sense. In terms of Yesir though, how do they make any money?
So my understanding is, I assume the way they do it is they charge a fee to the drivers, and then drivers have some way of like paying them electronically, or maybe mailing them cash. I don't know, but they do know how much the rides cost.
Okay. Is there a large use of remittances in Algeria, or not so much?
I mean, I don't want to like fully generalize, but it's not like such an impoverished country, such that remittances would be required. They are also a little bit more difficult to send. You have to use something like Western Union, to send it, which has a lot of fees. I would say the need is not like super high, so therefore probably remittances are not super high, although they happen, especially around like holidays. Since it's a Muslim country, there's holidays where gift giving is a big part of it.
Right.
Sending donations, that kind of thing. Usually, probably to organizations who would then distribute.
Okay, interesting. So we kind of have like a purview of Algeria, the economy of Algeria. It's largely a cash-based society. There's some tech. People have access to phones. We have access to internet. What have you seen crypto used for within Algeria?
So the biggest use for sure is that US dollar gray market. So a lot of the time for people who, if you don't have physical cash US dollars, you can just go to the market and pay someone in USDT. That's by far the most common. And then
So,
they'll accept that for the same rate that bills are.
okay, so when you go to the market, then they're using QRs like on smartphones to take a USDT payment.
I personally haven't done a crypto payment in one of those markets, so I don't know if they use exactly QR codes, but I'm sure that they have some way of sending, showing their address.
Right, right. Interesting. But people are doing that.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, transactionally speaking, if it's USDT, it's likely on Ethereum or maybe Binance. So the fees here aren't going to be incredibly small. We're talking anywhere from maybe $1 to $5, depending on congestion. So I suppose then that would be more. I mean, to give like an idea of GDP here, do you have any idea what the median GDP is of Algeria?
The per capita, I'm not quite sure. No.
Okay. We don't have Jamie in the room. I think it's on the order of like 10,000 per capita, but the point being is $1 to $5 for most transactions, like smaller transactions, would be a pretty hefty fee. So you would have to sort of reserve that, I guess, for larger purchases for it to make sense.
Yes. However, I'll add the caveat that most people who would be using crypto are probably doing this for like as a business or something. So maybe one use case that I've seen is that you'll go to the capital if you live in like a different city that's very far away. You'll go to the capital, do your like business for like money exchange, and then maybe bring that money back to your outer city where you can distribute that more to the people in that city. I'll also add that, again, because the daily need isn't super high for US dollar cash, then you're not going to be doing this so often and hitting those fees. But certainly, like, it will be impacting someone who's doing like $100 at a time, kind of thing.
Okay. So in Algeria, what kind of percentages of crypto users or crypto holders do you think kind of exist in the population, if you had to guess?
Quite low. I would guess quite low. It would be limited to people that are, fairly young, fairly, aren't worried about day-to-day expenses in terms of like, aren't living quite on the brink, and have the luxury to think about, should I keep my money in a more inflating asset or less inflating asset? And also, probably have more connections to like international, like are more internationally minded in terms of like they travel for business or for pleasure, and interact and have a greater need for like US dollars.
So when you have family there, you have extended family there, your parents emigrated from there. I mean, do they ever send money back to your relatives? And if they do, is that a Western Union sort of deal, or have they explored using crypto as an option?
No, so actually the way we do it is through crypto. So we have family there, and generally the family that's there, like, it's not like they are the end recipient of that money generally. So what they'll do is we'll send them USDT, and then they use the USDT to go to the market, and then they can exchange it and then distribute it to someone in need or someone in the community we know. Also, when it comes to our travel, one strategy that we have is essentially like it's kind of it's a little bit complicated, but it's kind of like a dual, I guess, bookkeeping system where like we bring in dollars, and then either they do the exchange at the market, or it like goes into a multi-year thing so that if they travel, like we can give them dollars, that kind of thing.
Oh, there's like a ledger.
That's, I think it's been a while since we've done that, but at one point that was one strategy.
Interesting. So interesting. Does anyone use crypto like speculatively in Algeria, or people kind of like holding Bitcoin, number go up sort of behavior, or is that not a thing that exists?
No, that definitely happens. I think, again, more in the younger generation, but yeah, there's certainly people who don't have any like day-to-day use for it. They just speculate.
Okay. Now, but people aren't really using it as offshore accounts, from what you can tell, or would you say they are using it offshore accounts?
In what way? Offshore accounts.
So when we are talking to like Alejo, right, the problem they have is inflation, but they don't really have good access to offshore accounts. So sort of crypto provides the behavior of offshore
Mm.
accounts, whereas they can't get access to it directly any other way. So they can get a Binance account or they can hold Bitcoin on Lemon.
Hmm.
Do you see people using it like that, or it's really just sort of international travel, trade, sort of remittance, and like purchasing imported goods that kind of the dollars come up with?
Yeah, I would say I haven't personally met or encountered or really heard of someone using this as kind of like a store of value offshore type thing to escape like the currency. It's more like, yeah, speculation or there's an actual need for it.
Relative to import, export, or
Right.
remittance, it's kind of like
Yes.
how it's used.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. Cool. So what do you kind of see as the future? Do you think of crypto in Algeria? Do you think it's gonna pick up, or are they keyed to be able to move away from cash, or you think cash is pretty ingrained in the mid to short to midterm?
I I I think that, yeah, cash is definitely there to stay for a while longer in Algeria. I would say that if for whatever reason, maybe like if the government starts encouraging like some kind of digital payment system like CBDC or something like that, which is not anything they've talked about or um, anything that's like on the horizon as of yet, then I would say that would definitely encourage people to be more interested in looking at alternatives. I will say it's kind of funny, but the Algeria is kind of it's so interesting because in some things they can be pretty far ahead, but in many things they can also like take forever to implement. Um, so for example, like unleaded gasoline was was not mandated until like 2020.
Nice.
Yeah, so like there's stuff like that that's like super anachronistic. But there's also things that are pretty advanced. I would say like the political system in Algeria is pretty it works reasonably well in terms of the relationship the government has with the people in some ways. So like this is why I think the inflation hasn't been felt by people as much, because the government does put in an effort to kind of shield the citizens from noticing the inflation as much. So for example, like essential items like food, gasoline, electricity, things that normally are the most affected by inflation, especially here in the United States, are the most protected against inflation over there. Partially because the government subsidizes it, and partially because it's an internally produced item that's not subject to international inflation.
Interesting. So I'm just wondering about the cash thing. Would you say it's just what has been, or would you say there's sort of an ingrained cultural attachment to physical cash in Algeria?
It's hard to tell those two apart, I would say. I think part of it is any electronic or like non-cash payment system will certainly come with like, and the history is it has come with more like government scrutiny and oversight and like burdensome tax regimes and stuff like that, to where people are discouraged from using it because it just opens you up to so much more scrutiny, right?
Interesting.
So I think the norm is just to go with the flow. Like if everyone's using cash,
Well, so you
go
did kind
ahead.
of answer the question in an indirect way, which is it is ingrained in the culture to use cash because they don't want the government getting into the business.
Yeah, yeah, I'd say so. Yeah,
which I mean, if you look at America, right, people that still use cash probably have similar
yeah.
sentiments in some ways. Well, cool. Is there anything you want to add? Anything we didn't cover? What do you think the future looks like for crypto? Is it going to be a slow burn here in Algeria?
I think conquering Algeria with crypto will be an achievement. It's a very unique situation because again, like the pressures that force people to abandon their currency and go towards crypto aren't as acute in a country like Algeria, and there's just it's there's there is a lot of history and culture to the way things are right now. But I would say also like there's still there is a lot of hope in terms of I think like the newer generation of people that are especially like people who are traveling and like have a need for importing, exporting things that are not locally produced. I think that's where crypto is most likely to be used initially in Algeria. We were talking about how like a country can try to safeguard its citizens from inflation. And one of the ways Algeria does it, which is really cool and fascinating, is they're not the only ones, but it's very effective, is by like locally producing as much as possible. Because if you're not like interacting with the outside world as much economically, then you're not subject to, the pressures of the outside world. So if you're producing your own energy, most important. Second to that, you're producing your own food. And really those two are like the most important day-to-day necessities. And obviously you have water and shelter and stuff like that. Then people can live without really being affected by inflation until they go to buy a car or they go to buy an electronic like luxury, right? And so it's an interesting way for like people to be able to live their lives.
Yeah, one of the things I've always wondered about with sort of insular economies versus the globalized economies, the sort of the classic economic argument is that you want to have globalized economies because individual countries sort of that have cheap labor can specialize in doing cheap labor activities. And then everybody can benefit because we can buy cheaper TVs and cell phones and t-shirts and whatnot, right? I've always thought that that's a slightly short-sighted sort of interpretation, because I don't think the full social consequences of offshoring labor like that are accounted for in the prices. And I think they're sort of made up on the back end in decrease in welfare in the country that's exporting the jobs, so to speak. And it manifests in crime, in drugs, in more expensive social welfare systems, in poverty, etc. So in some ways, just thinking about the price of a television as like the metric of success, I think really falls short in sort of the globalist viewpoint. Like, I'm perfectly sort of like a laissez-faire guy, but if you're going to have national borders and we're going to have social welfare systems, I think it becomes obvious that just offshoring to achieve lowest price goods is probably not the best idea, right? And in some ways, it's kind of like support your neighbors, right? Any given economy is going to have a distribution of people, talents, and abilities, right? So, to say that I can go to a cheap labor market because their hourly is cheaper, then like, what does the guy do that really can only work a repetitive factory job? You just sort of removed him from the economy. You're saying everybody in this sort of higher priced economy like has to do a higher value job, but not everybody's capable of doing a higher sort of value job at a higher wage. There might not be that many higher value jobs available, so you're always naturally then pushing some number of people out of the market. And I think that creates disenfranchisement. It creates a sense of desperation. It creates a lack of fulfillment. It creates this dependency culture, and like that's where like drugs and crime and everything else comes in, right? So as a laissez-faire guy, again, I think free markets should compete, but putting a globalist free market overlay on top of something that's clearly not free markets, i.e. geographically bounded nation states with welfare systems, is a completely maladaptive outcome.
Yeah. I mean, if you optimize for the price of TVs, like you ignore the fact that you can't eat TVs. And so the price of food goes up or the price of energy goes up.
Yeah, well, to dig into the price of TVs, it's pretty funny. One of the reasons that inflation remains so low at least as reported by the BLS, is they have something called the hedonic quality index.
Yeah.
So when a new TV comes out and it's a little bit brighter and a little bit bigger, instead of saying, oh, that TV went up in price 30%, the BLS says, well, qualitatively, that TV is twice as good as the one you could buy last year.
Yeah.
So even though it went up by 30%, its actual price went down by 70%. So that would be a deflationary good, and we can offset that with inflationary goods, and then we can say the aggregate inflation is lower than what it really was. But the interesting part about the hedonic quality index is that it's completely subjective and arbitrary. So they can basically print whatever CPI they want to using that metric.
Yeah, I think one of the other super insidious parts of the official CPI calculation is, I don't know exactly what the term is, but essentially it lowers it looks at what like the average person is buying, right? And like if the price for that thing is like gone up or gone down, right? So let's say the average person like in 1 year is buying like a lot of high quality food products, like let's say a lot of beef, a lot of meat. And the price of beef or meat goes up. And so the next year, because of that, now they're buying a lot of
hot dogs.
Right. Hot dogs, chicken, things that are less like cost less.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, inferior substitutes.
Right. At least in the minds of the people who are purchasing those products. And yet the CPI number looks at, oh, well, now this person...
This preference has changed.
Yeah, this person is spending less on food. So actually, we're doing great, right? Inflation has gone down.
Because chicken is cheaper than beef. Inflation has gone down.
Right. Yeah.
Even though because beef became more expensive, preference changed. So now people are buying more chicken.
Yeah.
We reflect the change of preference to inferior substitute goods as a decrease in pricing.
Yes. Yeah, we don't have parity on the quality of goods necessarily.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? With especially with meat, like the variation in the quality of meat you can get, right? And the funniness in the labeling too, because they're completely non-descriptive names in terms of organic or antibiotic free or pasture raised versus grass fed. These are all completely different meanings and completely unintuitive to the name.
Yeah.
Whole Foods recently introduced a system where they actually like grade the meat with like a score.
Okay.
It takes into account sort of health of the animal welfare, etc. And it goes from 1 to 5. But even in Whole Foods, it's supposedly like running sort of a high quality business with only high quality items. Maybe in the whole like counter will you find 1 or 2 items that have a 5. Wow. And then you'll find like 1 or 2 that have a 4, and then like everything else is 3 and below.
We should index that year over year, see the quality of Whole Foods items going up or down.
Yeah. Well, and I'll just, as an aside, I'll encourage people, if you're going to eat beef, eat grass-fed, pasture-raised beef if you can find it.
Yes.
The way I do it is I actually have a friend who has some land and grazes their own cows, which is really the only way you can ensure you can get access to the real McCoy, so to speak.
Yeah.
So make friends with your local farmers and ranchers and plant your own gardens, try to source your own food is just really the best you can do.
So going back to the subject of Algeria, that's or let's just say more insular economies in general, like that's actually the norm. Like you go to every day. First of all, you don't get your groceries like once a week or once every 2 weeks. You get them every day in the morning or in the afternoon, right before dinner, something like that. You go to like the shop that's usually like just right on the ground floor of your apartment building or right across from your house or whatever your situation is, and you'll go to the grocer. Then you'll go and he'll have like, all the vegetables. And then you go to the other guy that has like the dairy. And then you go to the other guy that has like the meat. And each one of those is like getting like the fresh stuff like every single day. And you first of all, there's a lot of competition, but you also develop a relationship with like the one guy. So, if its quality starts going down or something, you can talk to him, and if he still doesn't work out, you go like literally a few steps away from him and there's another store selling the exact same product. So there is a benefit to like that that relationship, even from like a community level, even from like a societal level, there's a lot of benefit
What,
to
what,
how
what,
that
what do you think
works.
the percentage of income is on food in Algeria as like a percentage of income?
Um, so I would say it's probably pretty high. There's a difference. There's a big gradation because there's bread, which is like so cheap, like
Right.
literally nothing, for a loaf of bread. And then there's things that are like meat is probably more expensive than it is here relative to our incomes. But like vegetables and like fruits and all this stuff, it isn't that much. So I guess if you're eating a lot of meat, then it's expensive. But other than that, you're probably not worried about it. I will say like the issue of like food insecurity is much lower, I would say, than it is even like here, unless you count like food stamps and stuff like that. But
Right.
without government assistance, like most people are doing fine.
How sort of is the profitability of the people in agriculture? Because like one thing that I've observed, and I'd be interested to hear if this holds in Algeria, is sort of the less manipulated the money system is, the more fair value is achieved at sources of production. So if you kind of have a less adulterated money system with finance and whatnot, you should end up with the farmers and the producers getting a little more, relatively speaking, than when sort of the economy is centered around finance, because they kind of are the source of the goods and the values in society, rather than this source being the hypothecated new dollars that have been printed.
Yeah.
Would you think that that holds in Algeria, where the farmers do a little bit better, like comparatively speaking, than they do in the U.S.?
It's hard to speak from my perspective for like the farmers themselves. I know that people working on the fields generally are not like super well. They're not well off generally. It's a pretty difficult job. I will say, like, it's possible that they're getting relative to like in the U.S. Maybe they're doing better in terms of like their position in society versus like a farmer in the U.S. who has like tons and tons of debt and like just can't.
Well, I
like,
mean, a lot of workers in the U.S., when you're talking about actual physical labor on the
True,
farms, they're
yeah.
not even U.S. citizens.
Yeah, exactly,
They're
yeah.
they're migrant farm workers from Mexico and South America that come up during the harvest season.
Right. So relative to that, I would say they're probably doing like Algerian farmers are doing a lot better because you can have like a normal life, like with a family, and have kids that have education and stuff like that. Whereas, yeah, in the U.S., like, yeah, people are just being brought over from other countries without a citizenship. And so therefore they get no government protection for any of their wages or any of their like workplace safety or anything like that. And they're often like single. They often like can't come with their families, so they're just supporting one person and then sending remittances. So it seems like a more difficult situation, in the U.S. for those kinds of people.
Interesting. Well, cool. That was like a little fun extended session there. Is there anything else we want to cover?
Nope, not right now. I think it's been a good conversation so far.
Yeah, appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah.